You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hey, all you music lovers. Welcome back to Modern Musicology. My name is Alan, and say hello to Anthony Williams.
Hey everyone, there's one thing you need to know about me. I'm not the Antichrist or the Iron Man.
And Stephanie Seymour.
Hey everyone, I don't have quite the intro, but hi.
And this week, we are going to be talking about Ozzy Osbourne. We would have done this a little sooner, except that we already had a couple of recordings in the can when the news of his passing came out. So we are jumping into that this week, and we are joined by a very special guest, our buddy, Matt Alschbach from the Rock and Metal Professors podcast.
Thank you so much, Alan. I appreciate it. It's nice to be here. I am honored that it is the third time that I'm on Modern Musicology, and I believe that is a record, if I'm not mistaken.
You are always welcome.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And so anytime we do anything metalish, we'll have to have you on. But if there's ever anything not metalish that you want to talk about, just let us know. We'll have you on.
Well, I do love Billy Joel. Just throwing that out there.
Okay.
You're
nice
on next
to
week.
know. You may be hearing Matt's lovely voice again in our next show.
He's going for 4 shows before we can get on the phone with Gina Shock.
Right. It's a fight out between Matt and Gina Shock.
Gina, yeah.
And that chick can fight. She'll take
Yeah.
you.
Mhm.
Anyway, so this week we are going to be talking about Ozzy Osbourne, who very recently passed away after a very long and illustrious career, both as the lead singer of Black Sabbath, one of the architects of the whole metal genre, and as a solo artist. So we're going to talk about all of that stuff. And let's just start out by each of us talking a little bit about how we first encountered Ozzy, like what was our first exposure to Ozzy's music. I will start by saying I have no idea. I don't remember where, because my introduction to Sabbath was 1980, the Heaven and Hell album. But at that point, I know I had heard Paranoid at least, Iron Man, I'm sure, maybe War Pigs. So I don't know when I actually encountered Ozzy for the first time. Matt, do you know? Not when I did, but when you did.
I do. I remember it specifically, and it really is a testament to the power of the album cover. So I went to visit a cousin in Missouri, 1980-ish, and she had Blizzard of Oz, the LP. And I remember seeing Ozzy on the ground with the fog shrouding behind him, the cross, and I was like, I got to know more about this album. I need to know what this is. And I hadn't put it together that he had been the singer of Black Sabbath. I knew who they were, but I didn't know anything about Ozzy, and just became a huge fan. Of course, Ozzy was very popular in the 80s. And I think the fact that he became the target of the satanic panic made me love him all the more.
Yeah.
That's so funny because that's exactly the experience I had with the Heaven and Hell album. I was at a friend's house and saw the album cover and I was like, I have got to know what this is. But that led me down a very different path. So we'll talk about that in another show. Anthony, how about you?
So I had just moved into senior school. I was 13 years old in 2001, specifically October 2001. When I had just been discovering heavy metal over that summer. I had gotten into Metallica. I'd gotten into the new metal scene, as it was at the time. I hadn't quite matured into Iron Maiden yet. That was the following summer when Rock in Rio came out. But featuring on MTV at the time, and MTV in the UK at this point, specifically MTV2, which was the rock and alternative one, featured a little documentary on the making of the music video for Gets Me Through. which was the lead single off of his Down to Earth album, which came out in October 2001. So there I am, mini metalhead, really discovering metal, still thinking that Limp Bizkits are kind of cool. I learned the error of my ways. And suddenly this older guy with this kick-ass guitarist doing these weird things in this video, like, you know, going from a lying down position to standing up without any support. And I'm just like, who is this guy? And of course, it's the early-ish days of the internet, in that it was still a time when not everyone had it at home, but we did. So I looked up this Ozzy Osbourne character and found out that he had been the lead singer of a band called Black Sabbath. And from there, it was on to Paranoid, because Black Sabbath sounded interesting to me, and then just down this rabbit hole of Black Sabbath more than Ozzy Osbourne, ultimately.
Mm. And Stephanie, how about you?
Well, I'm coming to this whole thing like the casual Ozzy fan. So I feel I don't know specifically when I first heard him or Black Sabbath, but I know I must have heard, like, because I know the hits, or I won't call them hits, but whatever the most popular songs for Black Sabbath, like Paranoid and War Pigs and stuff like that. I mean, those are songs that you just know in your brain. I think I've known them since I was 12 years old, you know? So I must have heard them on FM radio, and I'm thinking it was probably NEW from New York City, the radio station, WNEW. And as far as Ozzy being a solo artist, I think I was more aware of him because of the whole bat incident, which was just in the news. I mean, it was just everywhere you turned. It was like the biggest controversy. And that was like, that was like 82 or 3. So that kind of made me want to know more about him. And then, like Anthony mentioned, I mean, he was just a huge staple on MTV. So I think just in the 80s, just seeing the videos for, like, you know, Crazy Train or Mom, I'm Coming Home, the Lita Ford video, which was huge also. So that's probably.
Yeah. So I think we should maybe talk about, like, kind of chronologically. So let's go back to the early days and let's talk about the formation of Black Sabbath. And I think a lot has always been said about why Black Sabbath sounded the way that they sounded because of the environment in which they were created. But what do you think was special about that combination of those 4 people? What do you think it was about the chemistry between those 4 that really made Sabbath different?
I actually think that's a fairly complicated question, because there's an element of their personal relationships. So they literally grew up together, and that gives you a chemistry that's hard to replicate.
Right.
And then on top of that, you had kind of some of their strange circumstances. So Tony Iommi losing his fingertips and having to tune down his guitar to compensate for the fake fingertips he had to use. So you had this insane chemistry of the 4 of them who knew each other so well, combined with having to do new and innovative things to compensate for a disability. And it just led to this radical sound that was so different from anything else. This tuned down, heavy sound. And you'd kind of seen some of the precursors to that in bands like Led Zeppelin, even Jethro Tull, who Iommi did a mimed performance with at the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus. But there was just nothing like that with the combination of things that they had that went together ultimately.
Also, I have to say, the tone of his voice is, there's nothing like it. There's nothing you just know Ozzy from the second he opens his mouth. Don't you think? I mean, there's nothing like that tone.
Yeah, absolutely. Very iconic sound to his voice. Anthony, I think we also have to acknowledge Bill Ward's jazz influence as a drummer. That's so unique, especially on those early albums, and in particular the debut. You know, the way he's attacking the drums is really interesting, and the fact that it could mesh so well with this kind of dark, down-tuned metal sound. And I mean, they really are the progenitors of an entire genre of music. And, you know, sure, he's tuned in E flat, which is just a half a step down. But he's got songs where Iommi's tuned down to C. I mean, that was really unique in the early 70s to be just in this kind of drop tuning. He's experimenting with different string gauges so that it still sounds full. If you play guitar and you tune down to C and you're using a very light string, the strings are going to be very floppy. It's almost a springy kind of feel. So the kind of innovation that is taking place in order to get certain sounds on certain songs is incredibly unique. And I know this because when I tried to learn Fairies Wear Boots, I was like, what is he doing? How is he tuned? It took me forever to figure this out. And it really wasn't until the advent of YouTube, when someone else had figured it out, that I went, oh, got it. So there are some really ingenious things happening with that band in its formative years.
Anthony is a bass player, so he does know all about floppy strings and detuning.
That said, I do want to talk about Geezer Butler, because I feel like people talk about Iommi, they talk about Bill Ward's drumming, and they of course talk about Ozzy's unique vocal abilities. Geezer often gets a little overlooked, but you watch any performance of Geezer, and he was and still is an absolute beast on the bass. His bass lines are not necessarily overly complicated, right? We're not looking at something like, Yes, in terms of what he's putting out there, but they do some things that are a little surprising.
Yeah.
Even you look at Paranoid, and the way he handles that, it seems like it's all root notes, but then he'll do the do on the bass to go with it, and it's just unexpected, and it adds just this tiny bit of flair on an otherwise unsung instrument. It's really cool.
I think a lot of his playing is as you say, it can be simple at times, but I think it's very melodic. I don't think it ever takes the lead in the same way that Tony does, as far as like the structure of the music or anything. But I think that what he does underneath that a lot of times is really, really cool and has its own presence, has its own sort of melodic structure to it that I find really, really interesting and cool.
I would also mention that Geezer Butler is the primary lyricist for Black Sabbath. And I think that might surprise some people that Ozzy was he did not write lyrics, just as when he went solo, it was Bob Daisley that wrote the vast majority of the lyrics. Even Lemmy wrote the lyrics to Mama, I'm Coming Home. Right. So, Ozzy was not a songwriter. He contributed to melody. He contributed to some choruses, but he is a front man. He brought a certain set of skills, as Liam Neeson would say.
I'm forever amused with his credits as vocal melodies.
Whatever do you mean?
Effectively, he's credited for wailing into the microphone.
His job. He's credited for his job. No.
And that kind of leads me into an area I really want to tackle, because Ozzy, honestly, he wasn't a talented vocalist. He did something different with his voice that wasn't otherwise really done, but he wasn't a good singer. He brought something unique, and he was one hell of a showman. But from a technical perspective, he wasn't great. But everything else he did, whether it was with Sabbath or the musicians he surrounded himself with on his solo projects, there was magic there, because he was able to take that ethereal voice and combine it with his onstage antics to really bring a good show and entertain.
I mean, I think I would have to agree with you in a way. But it's interesting. Today I was watching the Mama I'm Coming Home video just because I just wanted to see it. I love that song, and I don't know. In all of a sudden I thought to myself, wow, that's such a great vocal on that song. Like he was really hitting some notes on that song. So I don't know, Anthony. I mean, I know what you're saying. It's not like he has a huge range or something like that, totally, up or down, but he was a great front man.
And here's the thing, I'm going to take this where I was always going to take this, in that when you compare him with his successors in Black Sabbath after he left, right, you look at Ronnie James Dio, very technical singer. You look at Ian Gillan, not quite as technical, but still more technical than Ozzy. Glenn Hughes, Ray Gillan, all of those guys were very, very technical singers in comparison to Ozzy. That's not to say Ozzy isn't good and he's not enjoyable, but he's not technical.
Technical, yeah. Yep. I
Yeah.
would say you're
But how much was technical needed in what Sabbath was doing in their early days?
Yeah. And again, Ozzy's Ethereal Whales really
I think
brought something different.
Right. I think they built the music around what they had in a way that showcased what they had to its fullest, to its best.
That said, I know from Heaven and Hell, Dio's first album, there were demos out there on some of the very early versions of some of those songs with Ozzy that have never seen the light of day. And I am so curious as to how something like the title track or Die Young, obviously the lyrics would be different, but what Ozzy would do with that. And there are some where there's nothing. Children of the Sea, for example, was written with Dio.
Right.
Soup to nuts.
Right.
But some of those songs in Mr. Iommi's vault, there are Ozzy demos, and I really want to hear them.
I do remember, and I don't want to get too much into pitting the two against each other, but I do remember an interview that Ronnie did in a magazine, and they had a full page poster of Ronnie at the microphone in this really dramatic pose, and this quote. They did sort of a pull quote from the interview and put it on that full page poster. And it said, and I had it hanging on my wall for years and years and years. And it said, how anybody can compare me to Ozzy vocally, they're either completely deaf or totally stupid. I thought
there is no comparison. And,
right.
When Dio did his second of 3 stints with the Sabbath Boys, it was the same time as Ozzy's No More Tours tour, and we all know how that went because eventually he went back on the road. But he wanted Sabbath to open for him on his last couple of shows, and Dio's reaction was, "I'm not opening for that clown." I mean, there was no love lost between those two men.
Okay. I guess we'll just have to get into it. I heard stories at the time that on Ozzy's early tours, he had a little person in his touring entourage that they called Ronnie.
Mm-hmm. And when Vinny Appice replaced Bill Ward, Ozzy went through a period of referring to Sabbath as Geezer and the 3 Wops.
Dang.
Yep. So, I mean, there was no love lost whatsoever. Anyone who has any images of Ozzy and Dio hanging out in the next life, they're not doing that. They are at the polar opposite ends of that heavenly room, probably singing as loud as they can to try and outdo the other.
All right, well, let's talk about Ozzy some more.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the obvious place is Ozzy left Sabbath and went and did his own thing.
Well, Ozzy was fired from Sabbath.
Yeah.
I was trying to be nice about that, Matt.
Well, so I want to piggyback on what you said, Anthony. I'm both going to push back a little bit, but I'm also going to ultimately agree with you. So I think if you look at Ozzy, if you listen to Ozzy's voice on those early albums, not only does he have that really unique quality to his voice, I think he sounds really good. There is live footage that testifies to that. But the years on the road, the drug abuse, the alcoholism definitely took its toll. And you can hear that by 78, 79. I mean, there are some really rough vocal performances. And when Speak of the Devil came out, you're all familiar with Speak of the Devil, probably. Oh, yeah. That is the tail end of the Diary of a Madman tour. Randy Rhoads had died. He'd been replaced by soon-to-be Night Ranger guitarist Brad Gillis, which I think is probably the greatest live Black Sabbath album that there is, even though it is not a Black Sabbath album. It's incredible, particularly from the perspective of guitar playing. But I was so disheartened when I learned that Ozzy had re-recorded all of the vocals in the studio. And I didn't know this until probably 10 years ago when a VHS tape was circulating around that had those 2 shows at the Ritz in New York City with the unedited vocal. And when you hear Ozzy's voice unedited, it is just, we probably shouldn't use strong language on this show, correct?
No, it's fine.
No, we use
go ahead.
It was a shit show. Yeah, it is. It is not good. It is not good. Both performances, and you understand why he re-recorded the vocal. It needed to happen. So there's
Yeah.
a lot of doctoring that went on. I don't think it detracts from his legacy, from the imagery, from. I mean, has anyone been better at crafting an image as the madman of rock and roll? And of course, today we call him the Prince of Darkness, which is a relatively new incarnation for Ozzy that came out around the time of the Osbournes.
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
but but no one's been better at cultivating this image, particularly of him as this sinister figure, as this dark lord of this satanic figure. When if you listen to Sabbath's music, if you listen to Ozzy's music, there's nothing satanic about it.
Hmm.
Mhm.
People really got that wrong in the 80s, and he
Well,
became the poster boy for Satanism.
and I think a lot of that, Sharon Osbourne, formerly Sharon Arden, his manager turned wife slash manager, she definitely cultivated a lot of that because she knew it would sell. Say what you will about Sharon, and I have some issues with the way Sharon has conducted some of her business, but she was very shrewd at
Oh
what she
yeah,
did.
she is a
Yeah,
great
she was a smart
manager.
lady.
Yeah, real smart, really clever, and she, her dad was a manager too. So I think and she worked for her dad, and that's how they met
Hmm.
actually. But she was around that most of her life.
Right.
Yeah, and he was as ruthless as she was. And when she took on management of Ozzy, she basically stole that contract from her dad, and they didn't speak for over 20 years.
That's right. Well, let's talk about that since we're kind of conversation has kind of gone that way. 1980 rolls around and Ozzy has left / been fired and is no longer with Sabbath. And we come to that crossroads where Sabbath moves on without Ozzy, which a lot of fans never thought could happen, never thought could work. But then also Ozzy moves on without Sabbath, and Ozzy comes out with his first solo album in 1980, Blizzard of Oz. And I feel like Ozzy had a lot to prove. Ozzy, you know, I guess we should talk a little bit about what Sabbath was like toward the end, in that Ozzy era. But I think Ozzy really came out needing to prove himself.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And honestly, I look at Sabbath at the end of the Ozzy period, right? Technical Ecstasy, not my favorite Sabbath album. I actually like parts of Never Say Die a lot more. And
Mm.
Never Say Die is often slated, but you have a track on there that sends a shiver down my spine every time I hear it. And I would happily rearrange the track listing on Never Say Die to put that track as the final track, and that's Junior's Eyes.
Oh, yeah.
That is one hell of a track. You can hear Ozzy's emotion. It's so different and so good. And anyone who says that Sabbath were a spent force is candidly ignoring a track like that.
Mm.
But yeah, they were not the same force they were with their first 5 or 6 albums.
And Anthony, I've talked to people that think Technical Ecstasy is their best album. So it's just
Really?
so interesting. Oh, yeah. It's interesting. I think depending on when people became fans of the band, there's an album that stands out to them.
Mm-hmm.
For me, the first album, was given the first album by my uncle when I was a kid. And so for me, it was always that first album until I kind of circled around Sabbath Bloody Sabbath later on. I liked that album because they were doing some really different things. There were some orchestral numbers. And even though they were in a bit of a drug-fueled haze, they were still doing some really innovative work. And it just, the production is very unique on that album. So for me, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath is their best album. I don't think you would find many people that think Never Say Die is their best album, but yes, there are a few good tracks on it.
Yeah.
But you can also see abandoned disarray. You can hear that on that album. It's a little lost.
And of course, there was a point during the recording of Never Say Die where Ozzy had quit.
Yes.
Yeah.
There was a performance on a British TV show where they had Dave Walker come in and perform an early version of what would become Junior's Eyes. Completely different lyrics, very bluesy voice. It doesn't really work with the Sabbath sound. But yeah, you're right, Matt, on touching. This is a band in disarray. This is a band that is falling apart at the seams. And I think it's very telling that afterwards they flat out fired Ozzy.
Right. So Ozzy comes out 1980, Blizzard of Oz, and just talk about that album a little bit. Talk about the impact that that record had on Ozzy's career and on the radio landscape at that time.
I think for me, that Blizzard of Oz showed me what Ozzy would be as a solo artist, and that's a singles artist. There are some phenomenal tracks on that album. I mean, Crazy Train is the obvious one. Mr. Crowley is the other. But there are a lot of tracks that I skip on that album. You know, to me, it really does become a question of, with every Ozzy solo album, there are 2 or 3 tracks that I think are absolutely phenomenal. And then the rest I could take or leave.
Yeah. What about you, Matt?
Anthony, I agree with you to a degree. I also think that Revelation Mother Earth is incredible.
Yes.
That's where you really get a sense of just how good a guitar player Randy Rhoads is becoming. He was already great. He was great in Quiet Riot. You get a sense of it. You don't truly see his mastery until the next album, Diary of a Madman. But Revelation Mother Earth, I like that for so many reasons. It's orchestral. It showcases Randy's abilities. It's Ozzy illustrating that he really is a hippie, right? People, want to say that he's this terrifying, sinister Satan worshiper, but he's really just kind of a tree hugger. War Pigs is an anti-war song. It's an anti-Vietnam song, right? So you really get a sense of that with that song. Suicide Solution is unbelievable. Great live track for many, many years. But I agree with you, Anthony. There are some weaker numbers on that. But it does give you a sense of what the band is becoming. I'm so thankful that we got 2 albums from Randy Rhoads before he was tragically killed.
Yeah. I'm going to agree with you, Matt. Revelation Mother Earth is a spectacular track, but there's other things on there that I really dig too, like Steal Away the Night. I think it's fantastic. It's just a good, solid rocker. It's nothing as special as Revelation is, but I think it's a great song. And even the later added bonus track, You Looking at Me, is a great song. I don't care too much for Goodbye to Romance, I will say. So that might be the only real skipper that I have on this album. But I feel like, when you're launching a solo career and the first 2 singles that you come out with are Crazy Train and I Don't Know, you have made a statement with those 2 songs. And you have said, I am coming for blood. I'm coming for your throat. I am coming to win. And I think he did.
I feel like if I know those songs, like that's, you know what I mean? Like, cause I like, again, the casual, it does. And that's what he's really like. Crazy Train is a staple. So.
Yeah.
And I think Blizzard of Oz really had to be a statement piece because Sabbath came out with Heaven and Hell in April 1980. And we've talked about Heaven and Hell before. I think Heaven and Hell is a perfect album. There is not a single song on that album I will skip, and that's basically the only Sabbath album that I can say that's the case for. And then Ozzy releases his first shot as a solo album 5 months later. He effectively had to clap back because Sabbath have come in and said, Ozzy who?
Right.
And Ozzy's had to go, I'm still here, and I'm going to do my own thing, and I can do exactly what Sabbath are doing, but with a different flair to it.
Yeah.
And also something you said about him being like a singles guy. I mean, this is the perfect timing with MTV just a couple years later for being a singles kind of guy. I mean, he I think reached a whole different audience when he became, started getting played on MTV.
As lots of bands did.
Oh, well, yeah, that's sort of like, doesn't need to be said, I guess, but yes.
But Sabbath really didn't do anything much as far as videos go, as far as like courting MTV. And I think that's where Ozzy really moved forward.
Yeah. I'm sure Sharon saw the writing on that wall.
Right.
Yeah, I just want to mention for your listeners, there is not a lot of Pro Shot live footage of the Randy Rhoads years. However,
Yeah.
there was I believe it was a British music program that recorded versions of, correct me if I'm wrong here, Anthony, but I believe it's Crazy Train and I Don't Know, or maybe Suicide Solutions, maybe 2 or 3 songs. It's in the studio and it is the very best thing you're going to find of Randy Rhoads playing. And, there's a lot of, kind of concert shot footage. It's all very grainy. It's at a distance. There's not a lot of great live footage of Randy, unfortunately. And so that's about as good as it gets, but you really do get a nice sense of them in the studio and what that would have sounded like with the early version of the band, which includes Daisley on bass and on drums, Lee Kerslake, who are I should mention that Lee Kerslake and Daisley are the recording artists on both Blizzard of Oz and Diary of a Madman, contrary to what a lot of people think. A lot of people think it was Rudy Sarzo and Tommy Aldridge. They did not record on either of those studio albums.
Can I address that for a minute?
Please.
Some of that's Sharon, because there was a whole royalties issue around Daisley and Kerslake, where in the early 2000s, they had those lines re-recorded by Ozzy's then current band.
Yes, they did.
Because there was a huge falling out. And there was a point at which, I'm fairly certain this was deliberate, on Ozzy's website, Bob Daisley was credited with playing ass as opposed to bass. And knowing how petty that Sharon can be, I do not believe that was accidental.
Yeah, that's true. The 2010 studio albums, the re-release of Blizzard of Oz and Diary of a Madman, feature Rob Trujillo on bass, and I forget who's playing drums, but I avoid those versions. That's it. And I avoid those versions. I will not purchase those because that was, as you say, Anthony, a blatant attempt to cut out Kerslake and Daisley from profits, from royalties.
And the 30th anniversary versions of them restored the Daisley and Kerslake lines.
Because of fan pushback.
And Ozzy said, allegedly, he said, whatever the circumstances were, I want the original thing back. If that's true, good for Ozzy for pushing back on Sharon.
Right.
He always claimed that Sharon did it without his knowledge.
Well, and that's interesting because that's, going up to, this is kind of skipping over the second album, Diary of a Madman, which I think is an amazing album. And I think it's a huge step forward from the first album, Blizzard of Oz. And I think there's just incredible songs on that record. But going up to Bark at the Moon, there's a lot of talk about, we talked earlier about Ozzy as a songwriter, and he's credited on all of these albums. And when Bark originally came out, he was the sole credit for songwriting, where Jakey Lee and Bob Daisley said, well, you know what? We actually did contribute to these songs. And they were left out of the credits for a long time. And it wasn't acknowledged for a long time. Yeah. So Ozzy apparently wrote all of the songs on Madman solo.
Yeah, I really believe Ozzy wrote the guitar line for Bark at the Moon.
Well, I guess we can bash on Sharon for a while if we like, but I'd rather talk about Diary of a Madman and how it is a masterpiece and the apex of Ozzy's career as a solo artist.
All right.
It is the definitive Ozzy Osbourne album, in my view. Not a bad track on it. Even the deep tracks that never got played, Sado, Little Dolls, just tremendous musicianship.
Yeah.
Diary of a Madman, some people argue, is the best song he ever produced. Just masterful guitar work. As a band, they were never better. And if you look at the inner sleeve of Diary of a Madman, it shows, of course, Rudy Sarzo and Tommy Aldridge as the Ozzy Osbourne band, even though they didn't perform on the album. So for many years as a kid, I believed that they were on that album. It wasn't until much later that I discovered the truth. Bob Daisley wrote all of the lyrics on Diary of a Madman, and they are brilliant. It's really a strong album in terms of lyrical content. Didn't mean to rewind us there, but that we can't skip over Diary. It's such a definitive album, not only in Ozzy's career, but in heavy metal, in rock.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think that Diary is the best thing that band ever did. And, you know, when the first album came out, you kind of launch it with that 1-2 punch of I Don't Know and Crazy Train. And they did exactly the same trick with Diary, where you get Over the Mountain and Flying High Again. The first 2 singles from the album are the first 2 tracks on the album. And they are such a strong statement. They come out and just grab you by the throat and, you know, demand your attention. But then you've got stuff like You Can't Kill Rock and Roll. And that is such a great track. And the title track is amazing. But also there's a song, the second half of the album called Tonight, which is sort of a ballady kind of thing. And I think it's actually better than any of the slower ballady kind of things on the first album. I think it's a great song.
Concur wholeheartedly, Alan. There's just not a bad track on it.
Nope.
I'm glad you mentioned Can't Kill Rock and Roll. It is, I'm just, in terms of guitar work, you know, it's one of the few Ozzy albums that I will go back, and as you said, Anthony, I'll listen to it in its entirety, as I would Heaven and Hell and Mob Rules. I really like that
Yes.
as well.
So it's interesting to kind of think about, you know, it was during the Diary of a Madman tour that Randy was killed, sadly. And, you know, they took a couple of weeks off and they had to replace him somehow. And Brad Gillis came in after a fill-in guy. And it's so tempting to wonder where Ozzy's career would have gone had Randy not died. And, you know, you talk about the beginning of his career, of Ozzy's solo career, so much of it, you know, gets credited to Randy. But I think that there's this combination of those two people and that band as a whole. But between Ozzy and Randy, that is just lightning. There's just something about that dynamic.
I agree with that. I mean, I think he had that with 2 of his guitarists. I think he had similar with Zakk Wylde.
Yeah.
You know, I want to say Ozzy, but let's be honest, the reality is Sharon eventually falls out with the majority of his band members. That never happened with Zakk. And I think, and of course this is dealing with what ifs, I think Randy would have been the same. I think Randy would have had the same staying power as Zakk, but now I'm dealing in counterfactual history, and any good historian knows you should never do that.
Well, speaking of historians, Anthony, it's so ironic that you mentioned this, because I've thought a lot about this, and although I don't like to speculate, I'd just like to throw this scenario out for you. You are absolutely right, Anthony. There would have been a falling out. Randy Rhoads was already unhappy that Sharon wanted a Black Sabbath. He was not happy. He did not want that. He wanted to produce original music. He had already began pushing back. There was already some grumbling within the band with him and Daisley. You know, they were not happy with the direction the band was taking. And so here is my scenario. Randy may have lasted one more album, but ultimately he would have broke away and he would have joined David Lee Roth's band.
Oh, wow.
Huh.
You know, Roth's going to have an amazing guitar player.
That's right.
Right. And if Randy had been available, can you imagine that those early David Lee Roth solo albums with Randy on guitar?
Wow.
Or maybe he would have hooked up with Ray Gillen and we'd have had Badlands with Randy instead of Jake E. Lee.
I hope not. Badlands is such a great band with Jake. Yeah. But just throwing that out there, I thought entirely too much about this, which shows my geekdom when it comes to Ozzy.
It all happened in parallel universes, so don't worry. It happened.
That's right.
And here's the thing. Both Matt and I are historians. So we know that we really shouldn't deal in counterfactual history. But here we are, both doing it right now.
But you're also both podcasters. You have to speculate. I mean, that's part of our job.
Anyone else who has any historical training, we apologize. For everyone else, you're welcome for the entertainment.
Right.
Howdy! A new year means it's time for a new season of the Dragon Con Report.
We're here to help you plan, learn more about the con, and make the most of your trip.
From guest announcements to tips for navigating the con, we've got you covered.
Catch the latest episodes wherever you get your podcasts.
Because Dragon Con is better when you're ready for it.
The Dragon Con Report, your ultimate guide to the con of all cons.
Subscribe now and start your adventure.
I remember on MTV, VH1, whichever it was, that metal show. It was VH1, that's right, because VH1 went through their period where they became like an all metal channel, and they had that metal show on. And I remember Jake E. Lee was on there, and they spent most of the show talking about how, and of course, Jake was on not only Bark at the Moon, but Ultimate Sin. And, so it wasn't like that was his only contribution, but they talked a lot about how he and Bob's credits got excised. And at the end of the show, they had this thing where they do like a rapid fire question for their guest at the end of every show. And it's the same set of questions. And one of those questions is, what's a song that you wish you had written? And so they ask him that at the end of the show. And he's like, Bark at the Moon, apparently. Which I thought was really...
I saw that.
He did eventually get credited for that one song, I think.
Just for that one song. Yes, exactly. Yep.
Him and Dave.
He made enough stink about it because it was a hit.
Yep.
And he lost out on a lot of royalties.
Yeah. So here's the thing. I don't really think about those two albums with Jake E. Lee a lot. Bark at the Moon and The Ultimate Sin.
Yeah.
I really think of there being 4 eras or epochs of the Ozzy solo career. There's the Randy Rhoads era, there's the Jake E. Lee era, there's the Zakk Wylde era, which is by far the longest, and then there's the Andrew Watt era, and then there's that one weird little album with Gus G that no one ever thinks about. Andrew Watt was interesting. I'd say what single-handedly made Ozzy relevant again in the 2020s, at a time when his solo career had been dead in the water for the best part of 10-ish years. Zakk breathed new life after the death of Randy and then Jake E. Lee, and came up with what I think is the other absolutely phenomenal Ozzy album, which is No More Tears. I look at that, and you've got at least 5 of the 11 songs for me, which are just phenomenal. I Don't Want to Change the World, Mama, I'm Coming Home, No More Tears, Hellraiser, and Road to Nowhere. That is a very strong album for an Ozzy solo album, in my opinion.
Anthony, I totally disagree.
Uh-oh.
So first of all, I think the Jake E. Lee era is the second best era for Ozzy. Tremendous musicianship. And let me just offer this. Yeah. There is right now on YouTube, there is a live video. The guy who mixes his videos, his name is That Remaster Guy on YouTube. And what he does is he takes live video and he separates the tracks and remixes them and then reconciles them. And it is incredible, the work that he does. And he did this with a 1984 Ozzy show in Salt Lake City. It's out there in its entirety. And when you see what Jake is doing, it becomes so evident why he became Randy Rhoads' replacement. He is on another level. It's what he's doing is not human. He is so good on the guitar. And it's just remarkable. I don't think you see... He's a great songwriter. He's a great composer, Jake. And you do see that on several of the tracks. But Bark at the Moon's an uneven album. Ultimate Sin, I think, is a little bit stronger, but it's very polished. It's got some kind of pop sensibilities. And I think that's why perhaps it gets overlooked. But if you saw the performance of the Ultimate Sin just a few weeks ago during the Back to the Beginning shows in Birmingham, I believe it was Birmingham. Am I wrong about that?
It was Villa Park, which is the home stadium of Aston Villa Football Club, of which all the original members of Black Sabbath were fans. And yep, it's in Birmingham.
Thank you. Yeah. So there is a version of Ultimate Sin with Jake comes out. He performs most of the guitar work. But you've got Lizzie Hale on vocals, interestingly. And that is for me, it was the highlight of the entire day. It is incredible. And you really see how heavy and how full that song should have been if it had been recorded with a bit more bite to it. So I love the Jake era. I will say just very quickly here, Anthony, I believe that the best Zakk Wylde Ozzy album is No Rest for the Wicked. That is tremendous guitar work.
Yeah, that's a great album.
While we're on Jake E. Lee, very quickly, just shout out because he was in Dio's band for about 5 minutes before they brought in Vivian
Yep.
Campbell. So
Right.
strange little crossover there. He was actually in Dio before he was in Ozzy's band.
I think Bark and Ultimate Sin are also really great albums, and probably my second favorite Ozzy era also. But we're kind of running late on time already, which is kind of surprising, but I want to talk about that first, Matt, I want you to talk about the times that you saw Ozzy in concert, because I think you saw him twice back in the 80s, and I want to know what tours and your impressions of those shows.
Well, sadly, I never got to see Ozzy with Randy. He passed. And then, there was quite a bit of fanfare with Jake Lee. And I knew who Jake was because he had been in an early incarnation of Rat when they had played some dates in San Diego. There was a San Diego band. He had played in Rough Cut for a period of time. And then when he is recruited for Ozzy, and Anthony, you probably know this story as well. Briefly, it was George Lynch who was being considered to replace Randy Rhoads. And he had been practicing the songs. He had been working with Ozzy. And then Ozzy just walked up to George Lynch one day and said, "You're fired. We've got someone else." And they brought Jake in. And the reason for that, as I understand it, and this comes directly from George Lynch, is that George Lynch had to cut his hair because he had taken a job as a delivery guy because he had a kid. And George Lynch tells this story about being fired from Ozzy's band and driving home in tears, just absolutely shattered that he had lost this job to Jake.
I had forgotten that story. Yeah.
It's a cutthroat business, man. It really is. I don't know how anybody survived it and continued.
Right.
But I saw Jake in 1984 with the Bark at the Moon tour. I saw him again for the Ultimate Sin tour. And as I said, just an absolute tour de force on guitar. There is a live concert album that came out after the Ultimate Sin tour that showcases some of what Jake was doing, some of the incredible stretches on guitar where he's literally using his thumb and his pinky to do these crazy stretches. For those of you that are not guitar players, you may not know this, but Jake Lee did not use a tremolo system. It was a lot of body bends and then reaching above the nut on the bridge in order to get this kind of tremolo effect, which is very difficult to do, some weird tunings. He was really a great innovator and just such a force on guitar. It's unfortunate that we only got 2 albums, but I don't regret that too much because he then went on to found Badlands. And for any Jake fans, those Badland albums are much heralded by fans. Really, really great guitar work. And you see kind of where Ozzy's band might have went if Jake had stayed for a period of time.
And it's a huge shame those Badlands albums will never be reissued.
Do you want to talk about why, Anthony?
That would lead into a Ray Gillen conversation, who turned out to be a terrible human being infected with HIV, knowing it, having unprotected sex, and knowingly infecting other people. So part of the settlement with some of the injured parties was that those albums would never be reissued. They are great albums musically, and it comes back to a show that we've done before on this of can you separate the art from the artist?
That's right.
And in this case, there are families that are rightfully aggrieved by his actions. So shame for Jake Lee.
Yes.
But that's just the way of the world. That said, before we leave Jake Lee, I do just want to say how glad I am that Jake and Ozzy reconciled before Ozzy's death. I mean, that was not a separation that Jake was happy with at the time. And obviously, as Matt said, Jake played it back to the beginning, and he and Ozzy were texting days before his death. And Ozzy was saying things like, "I'm so sorry I didn't get to spend time with you," and they reconciled. Yeah.
So, for those who watched it, what's your overall impressions of that final concert? Which, as we were just talking about, was like a week or 2 weeks, I think it was, before Ozzy's death, and it's incredible to have been able to got that final show, your big send off, right before you pass away. But what was your overall impressions of that day? Because I saw some of it and thoroughly enjoyed it.
It's wild. It was like a tribute show before the man had died.
Right. It's like a memorial.
Yeah,
and he's
he
still there.
Performed his own memorial.
Right. I mean, that's amazing.
It is quite possibly the greatest day of heavy metal in history.
Yeah.
with all of the great bands that came and performed a few of their own tracks and then a few covers. There were some really neat covers on the day. Alice in Chains did Fairies Wear Boots, which is one of my favorite Sabbath songs. That was really neat. You know, the thing that really stood out to me, and correct me or push back if you like, but I was surprised at how good Ozzy's voice was considering the condition that he was in.
Right.
And he did not use tracks. Thank you for
Yes.
the not using tracks. But, you know, he really sounded pretty strong for most of it. I did notice it was a little choppy on some of the percussion. Bill Ward had not played live in a long time.
Yeah.
You really heard that with War Pigs, but despite all of it, it was just so neat to see them together one last time, just 17 days before Ozzy passes.
I didn't need to see Bill Ward topless. That's something I did not need to see.
But there was that whole period where they were basically refusing to get back with Bill Ward. And it was huge in the press where Bill was like saying, I'm ready to play. They won't let me in the band. And it was just this big, horrible situation. So I'm so glad that that final show, they put all that stuff aside and did the show together.
I mean, the whole thing had been they didn't think that Bill was up to a tour.
Yes, I know. But
so a one-time appearance doing 4 songs, clearly they felt Bill was capable of.
Well,
but I said thoughts.
yeah, right.
I mean, I want to call out some of the bands on that because it really was special. I mean, hearing Youngblood performing Changes was eye-opening to me. I didn't realize Youngblood could do something like that.
Yeah.
I didn't know who Youngblood was. I didn't know. He was amazing.
I remember him, I think earlier in his career, he did some hip-hop stuff, and that's who I remember him being.
Yeah.
Not someone who enjoys heavy metal.
And I know him from some of those Bowie tribute shows.
Yeah, he's versatile and actually quite an impressive young man.
Yes.
God, young man, fuck, I feel.
Finally.
Right.
I specifically want to call out the various all-star bands because some of those were pretty impressive and pretty special. I mean, Papa Emeritus, or I guess now he's technically Papa 5 Perpetua singing Bark at the Moon. Yes, please.
Awesome.
You know, I think Lizzie Hale singing The Ultimate Sin, that's already been called out. And then of the bands, it gave us the opportunity to hear some songs that have never, outside of tribute bands, been played live before. So Guns N' Roses playing Junior's Eyes.
Yes. Oh.
I mean, Axl Rose, his voice is kind of shot now, unfortunately. But it was so good to hear that. Metallica doing Johnny Blade.
Yeah,
that was unexpected.
Great. That was great.
You know, overall, just some big surprises that worked really well, and it was delightful.
Yeah.
Anthony, I'll also mention all props to Nuno Betancourt, who performed the most songs, 8 songs, with the various all-star incarnations, including the solo for Bark at the Moon, because Jake, at his age, is not as fast as he used to be. And so they brought Nuno in to double some of those solos. And what just a tremendous player he is, as well as Tom Morello, the music coordinator, putting that all together. Just remarkable, the effort by all involved.
And for Jake, I mean, the reason is his the cartilage in his right hand has deteriorated, so he can't, as Matt said, play solos at the same speed anymore. It's really sad.
And he was also less than a year from nearly being murdered. For those of you that are not aware, he was shot twice.
Well,
did you not know this, Stephanie?
No.
He was shot twice while walking his dog in LA.
Oh.
That's right.
No, in Las Vegas. He was in Vegas.
Oh, Vegas, sorry. Wrong
He was
lot.
in Vegas. He was walking his dog at about 3 a.m, and someone tried to shoot his dog. And in trying to get the dog out of the way, he was struck twice, including in the back, and it traveled through his body. He was very fortunate. So the fact that he was even there and playing is truly a testament to his commitment and hard work.
It's an even crazier story. He came across people trying to steal his neighbor's motorcycle, and in confronting them, they then went to shoot the dog. And and as Matt said, so it was a weird story. Again, another reason I'm so glad that he and Ozzy reconciled at the end.
Yeah. I just want to point out the big drum off. was so sexy. Holy shit, that was good.
Spoken like a drummer, Alan.
That's right. I have my priorities. All right. So we've only got a few minutes left, but I want to get favorite songs, favorite album, favorite era from each of you. What do you think tops your list for the whole Ozzy career? Matt, you go first because you're the guest.
Okay. So per album, or what are we doing? Just
Whatever you
one
want.
song?
Anything you want.
Okay. So off of Diary of a Madman, I would see either Believer or the title track. Off of Bark at the Moon, it would probably be Rock and Roll Rebel. Ultimate Sin is great. And then, you're going to have to help me, Anthony. Fire in the Sky is the song that I'm thinking of. What a great Zakk Wylde track that is. More of a ballad, but God, it's just so unbelievably good. And then, Black Sabbath, take your pick. There's just so many great songs. Anytime I hear Fairies Wear Boots, I have to listen to it all the way through.
Steph, you got some?
Well, I don't think I'm qualified, but I'll just say for my personal favorite of just the ones I know, it's totally Mama, I'm Coming Home. But I don't think that's the best era, really. Like for me, I think the early Black Sabbath is the coolest, like the pure hard rock metal kind of original sound.
All right, Ant.
All right, so I've just got some random shout outs on this. So from the Sabbath era, it's Children of the Grave and Junior's Eyes. Those are probably my two favorite Ozzy era Sabbath songs. From the early part of his solo career, it's Basic but Crazy Train and Mr. Crowley. From the Zakk Wylde era, a huge spot for Gets Me Through. It was my first Ozzy track. And also, I really love Hellraiser. For the 30th anniversary of that, after Lemmy had died, they did a mashup of the Motorhead and Ozzy versions where they trade off on vocals. And it's so cool. It works so well, hearing Ozzy sing one line and then Lemmy the next. And it's all because they co-wrote that song and both bands recorded it, and they were able to go in to the masters and build that. It's awesome. And then I think from the late time of Ozzy's career, as I said, he had a bit of a career renaissance when he started collaborating with Andrew Watt. So his Ordinary Man and Patient Number 9 albums. It's I really, really like Under the Graveyard, which was his comeback with Andrew Watt. And then I have one more call out that we haven't touched on. On Iommi's first official solo album, his self-titled Iommi album, there was a track called Who's Fooling Who that had Ozzy, Bill Ward, Tony Iommi, and then someone who wasn't Geezer Butler, Lawrence Cottle, on bass. That's a Sabbath track in all but name. And in 2000, it was so cool to hear that. That was awesome, and it worked really well.
There's a couple of Sabbath tracks that I'll just throw out a few, and that is, as Anthony said, Children of the Grave, I think, is great. NIB is such a great song. I love it. And The Wizard, I think, is great. From his solo career, there's from Bark and Ultimate Sin. I want to talk about just a few tracks that I love on those albums. From Bark at the Moon, Center of Eternity. Man, I love that song. That
Still
is
good.
So cool. And there's a couple of them on Ultimate Sin. I think that Killer of Giants is probably my favorite song. But there's also Lightning Strikes is really good. The Big Single, Shot in the Dark, I think is a great song. It kind of gets shit on sometimes, but because I think that's the album that Ron Nevison produced, and I think that a lot of fans think it's a little too pop, a little too polished, and I can understand that because he had kind of that same sound on other albums by other bands that he produced. And Kiss went the same way, and Heart went the same way, where he polished them a little too much. But I think the songs are fantastic. All right, so that's going to bring it to the end of this show. So thank you so much, Matt, for joining us to do this remembrance of Ozzy. And man, we're so happy to have you back. It's always great to have you on.
Always a pleasure to see all of you and to talk some hard rock and heavy metal. Anytime you'd like me to join you, glad to do so.
All right. So if people wanted to hear more of some of the stuff that you have done, where would they go to find that?
You know, it's funny you mention that, Alan. I am thinking about reposting all of the old episodes of the Rock and Metal Prof. So we've
You
been on,
should.
we kind of put it to bed for a few years, but I have been, as of very lately, I've been thinking about putting it back up and even perhaps recording some new episodes here and there.
Nice.
Court, my partner in crime, we've talked a little bit about it. I just saw him a few weeks ago. So that's something we've got in the works. So very soon you might see that available on all your streaming platforms.
Awesome.
That's amazing. All right, Stephanie, where can people find you?
Okay, people can find me at Stephanie Seymour Music on Facebook, at there_are_birds on Instagram, also website therearebirds.com. And you can find me on Bandcamp under my name and Spotify and all the streaming platforms under my name.
All right, Ant.
Well, as usual, you can find me on the Watchers in the Fourth Dimension podcast, watching our way through the entirety of Doctor Who. After a brief hiatus, we are back. We are coming to the end of season 19, so Peter Davison's first season. Check us out. We are available wherever you like to get your podcast, Spotify, Amazon, Apple, etc., including probably wherever you're listening to this one. You can also follow us on the socials, on both Facebook and Instagram at Watchers4D. And if anyone cares enough to follow me personally, you can find me on Instagram at Englishman in ATL.
And for me, you can find all my nonsense over at cosmiccreative.com, KOZMIC creative.com. And you can, from there, check out my other couple of shows, Doctor Who A to Z. Yes, I also have a Doctor Who podcast, and Earth Station Trek. Yes, I also have a Star Trek podcast because that's the kind of nerd I am. So in 2 weeks, we're going to be back and we're going to be talking about the very recent, what is it on HBO Max? Billy Joel documentary. And I can't wait to talk about that. Stephanie is a big Billy Joel fan and has watched that. And I haven't seen it yet, but I'm excited to.
It's a great documentary.
I'm looking forward to it. And Matt, were you serious about wanting to join us for that?
Oh, I'd love to. I'm a huge Billy Joel fan going back to the 70s.
Yay!
Absolutely.
All right, then. Dear listeners, you can hear us again in 2 weeks, joined once again by Matt Alschbach. That's exciting.
Right.
Hey,
Thanks,
everybody. Have a great week, and we will see you soon.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping at the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.